My son's voice cut through the air at the will reading. Don't expect a cent from Dad's. $92 million. His face drained of color when my name echoed in the room. She's still alive, he stammered. I figured she'd be gone by now. Should we check her pulse to be sure? Those were the first words I heard as I descended the stairs. Still dressed in black. The faint scent of lilies from my husband's funeral clinging to me. The family had barely scattered the last handful of dirt over his grave before they swarmed back to the estate. Not to grieve, not to reminisce, but to carve up the fortune. The hallway hummed with their chatter, their laughter, the sharp tap of heels on the hardwood floors of what was once my haven. I stood at the base of the staircase, clutching the banister my husband had carved himself, watching them pick apart my life like crows over a fallen deer. My grandson, with a smirk, slapped a bright yellow sticker on the antique clock, then the velvet sofa, then the curio cabinet holding our anniversary crystal. He moved like a bargain hunter at an estate sale, claiming treasures he hadn't earned. His sister swept through with her phone, an app open, mapping the rooms with digital lines. Once she's gone, we'll gut this place, she said to no one in particular. Maybe a home gym, definitely new fixtures. I stood there, unnoticed. No one offered me a seat. No one stopped. My daughter-in-law swept in with a tray of sparkling wine. To Dad's legacy, she toasted, her voice bright. He built an empire, and now it's ours to shape. Someone muttered, and to clear out the relics, laughter followed. My dining room chair was gone, swapped for a wobbly metal one from the shed. No cushion, just cold steel. They pointed me to the utility room. You'll be cozier there, away from the chaos, they said. I sat in silence, facing a cracked mop and a bucket of stale water. With a paper plate of cold ham and lumpy mashed potatoes. No one checked on me. No one cared. From the dining room, their voices carried. This place reeks of old books and grief, one said. Let's tear out the carpets, redo the lighting. My grandson peeled off a neon pink sticker and pressed it onto the sideboard beside me. This one's mine, he grinned, like he'd won a carnival prize. His sister walked in, phone scanning the room. We'll remodel once she's out, she said, spinning slowly. Maybe a wine cellar. Or a meditation nook. They didn't lower their voices. They didn't even glance my way. I sat still, clutching my coffee mug with both hands to keep it steady. Dad swore she'd go before him, one voice sneered. His only misstep. She made pies, another added. He built a dynasty. The laughter grew sharper. Let her fade with her memories. A cousin said. She probably doesn't even know what decade it is. My granddaughter giggled. Can we keep her social security if we forward her mail? Her brother snorted. She's practically a corpse already. Stick her in the shed and call it a day. I took a bite of the ham. It tasted like dust. I swallowed it anyway. I didn't speak. I didn't argue. But my hand slipped into my cardigan pocket. Feeling the crisp edges of a document I'd safeguarded for years. Bank memorandum. Signed and notarized, dated 15 years ago. It named me co-founder and initial investor in the family trust. My name was there in blue ink, sharp and undeniable. The kind of detail that holds up in court. They didn't know. They never bothered to ask. Back when the company was sinking, teetering on the edge of ruin, it wasn't the board or the bankers who saved it. It was me. I sold every piece of my past, my grandmother's sapphire pendant, my wedding pearls, the locket from our first anniversary. I didn't tell a soul. I wired the money and whispered to my husband, take it, but don't let them know it was me. He didn't, not until now. I heard my son in the next room. The beach house is ours. The yacht's already in my name. I'm taking the Bentley. Someone else called. Dad promised it to me last Easter. I want her cashmere shawls, the youngest chimed in. She's not wearing them anyway. More laughter. They were peeling away my life while I still breathed it. One of them wandered into the utility room. startled to see me there, and said offhandedly, "There's soda in the garage fridge. You look faint." Then he left without waiting for a reply. I sat for another hour as they divvied up the paintings, the properties, the past. Someone started hauling luggage upstairs, claiming the master suite for the weekend. One of the girls asked if they could paint it teal. When the wine ran dry and the music stopped, the stench of their greed lingered. Heavier than the mildew in the room, I stood slowly, my hips aching, steadying myself on the edge of the sink. Through the small window, I saw the peonies my husband planted along the walk, wilting from neglect. No one had watered them in weeks. I wondered if they even noticed. I walked back into the house, my steps soft, like the ghost they thought I'd become. But I wasn't finished. Not yet. My fingers tightened around the paper in my pocket, now warm from my grip. Let them celebrate. Let them plan. Let them mock. The will reading was coming, and I had a heartbeat, steady, impossible to ignore. They saw me as a burden, a shadow in their polished tale of triumph. But they'd erased a chapter that didn't suit their story. The one where I saved everything, and no one knew. 15 years ago, the company was crumbling. My husband came home late, his tie undone, hands shaking, the silence heavier than any words. He didn't need to say it. The bank had called. The numbers were brutal. They were about to lose it all, the clients, the contracts, the house. "We just need one break," he muttered, staring at the floor like he could will away the failure. "One deal with those Chicago investors, and we're back." But there was a catch. He needed cash to seal it, money he didn't have, and pride he wouldn't surrender. So I acted. That night, while he slept, I opened the cedar box in my closet. Inside were my treasures, my mother's ruby brooch, the diamond studs from our wedding, the gold choker I wore when we got engaged. Every piece carried a story, and I sold them all without a word. I wired the funds to the company's account and told him only, "Use it. Don't let them see you break." He didn't ask where it came from. He didn't want to know. That was his way, stoic outside, fragile within. The deal closed 3 days later. The investors signed. The company survived. They called him a genius, a titan. They never mentioned me, but that wasn't what stung most. A month later, I saw the new company brochure. His face was front and center, with the tagline, "A legacy forged alone." I smiled, bit my tongue, and said nothing. But I remembered everything. Even the night I wrote the IPO pitch by hand. He was prepping for another investor meeting, floundering, still pitching like it was the 90s. So, after the house went quiet, I sat at the dining table with a cup of peppermint tea and wrote. I mapped out a phased growth plan, tied to market shifts, shareholder value, and supply chain innovation. I'd done this before. In a life before marriage, before children, before homemaker became my title. That night, I signed the document with a pseudonym. Something neutral, untraceable. The next morning, I mailed it to the office. No return address. Just his name and the company's. He got it 2 days later. At dinner, he laughed about a brilliant anonymous proposal that had arrived. "The handwriting even looks like yours," he teased. I shrugged and kept slicing carrots. That pitch became the backbone of their IPO launch 6 months later. Pulling in $45 million in new capital, they hung a plaque in the office. Vision in action. His vision. But I didn't care then. I told myself the family needed one hero, and he was the better face. Women are taught to fade gracefully, to take pride in being the backbone while someone else gets the glory. But silence, held too long, becomes erasure. Now they stride through my house, tagging furniture with their names, joking about my memory, mocking my existence. They don't know what I gave, what I built, what I buried. There's a folder in my closet, tucked under unused tablecloths, holding the original draft of that pitch, ink faded but legible, my pseudonym in the corner. Next to it, a letter from the patent office. tying the strategy to a registered idea, not the company's, but mine. I never cashed the royalty checks. They arrive every quarter, stacking up. I didn't need the money. I needed the truth. But now they've crossed a line. Feeding me scorn, stripping my story, calling me gone while I still breathe. So I've opened the folder. I've called the lawyer. I've hired the analyst. I've documented it all, not for vengeance, not even for fairness, but for clarity. When they hear my name at the will reading, tied to the trust and the legacy they thought was theirs, there will be silence. And for once, I'll be the one speaking. They didn't even meet my eyes when they did it. It was a Wednesday, 6 days after the funeral. The house still carried the faint scent of carnations and cedar from the service. Condolence cards sat unopened on the mantel, as if mourning was too much effort. But their focus had shifted. The grieving was done. Now came the dividing, the claiming, the erasing. And it started with me. We've agreed it's best. My daughter-in-law, Margaret, said, her voice clear. She can move to the back room. I blinked. The storage room, she meant, with its cracked tiles and single bulb. It's practical, she added with a thin smile, plenty of space for a cot. My bedroom, our bedroom, was already theirs. I heard giggles upstairs, drawers yanked open, hangers clattering. My scarves, my novels, my perfume were being boxed up. Not gently, not with care, just cleared out. I shuffled toward the stairs, only to see labels on the boxes. Charity. Outdated, old lady stuff. They didn't bother hiding them. Margaret's husband, my son's son, held a clipboard, pointing at furniture like an auctioneer. That lamp's perfect for the lake house, he told his wife. A neon orange sticker appeared on the mahogany stand. This one's mine. I watched as my life was claimed piece by piece, the crystal vases, the rocking chair where I read to my son, the phonograph we played during snowstorms, all tagged with their cheerful markers. Margaret turned to me, her smile sharp as glass. She doesn't need a whole room, she said to the group. Just a bed until she's gone. A few uneasy laughs followed. No one spoke up. One of the boys, maybe Lucas, muttered as he passed the kitchen. If we keep her address, we can still get her pension checks. They laughed again. I didn't. I walked slowly to what was now my room. It smelled of dust and old pipes. A bare bulb flickered above. A cot sat against the wall. No sheets, just a worn quilt. My suitcase was there, topped with a chipped mug and a faded photo, its frame cracked. It was from our 25th anniversary. Standing under the oak tree, my husband's hand on my waist, my smile soft against his shoulder. Behind us, the house glowed warm. Now that photo had been pulled from the hall and shoved behind a crate of cleaning supplies. They didn't want to see it. Did they think I wouldn't notice? Did they think I'd forget? They forget I remember everything. The night my husband etched our initials into the porch beam. The smell of nutmeg and cloves on winter mornings. The way I held my son through his first heartbreak, whispering, "You're enough." I remember baking pies from scratch, driving to late-night recitals, stitching drapes to make this house a home. But now I'm just an obstacle, a problem to sidestep on their way to wealth. Margaret stopped by my cot that evening with a folded washcloth and a bar of plain soap. "For you," she said, setting them down like a donation. "Dinner's at 6. You can eat after us." I nodded. That was all I could do. That night, as they laughed over roast lamb and merlot, I sat on the cot, prying open a can of soup with a spoon's edge. No can opener was left for me. They whispered that I made pies, that he built an empire, as if love and care and sacrifice were worthless because they didn't show up in a ledger. I built pies, yes, but I built them, too. And now they're dismantling me with smirks and tape and bright little stickers. The cruelty isn't loud. It's subtle, precise, polite, but it wounds just the same. Later, when the house grew quiet, I retrieved the anniversary photo from behind the crate. I brushed the grime off the glass and pressed it to my heart. This was my home once. I was its soul. They think they've erased me, but they've only reminded me of what I gave and what I can reclaim. Tomorrow, the lawyer calls, and I'll answer with the voice they forgot I had. It began with a folder, leather, worn, hidden under a loose floorboard in the storage room, now my bedroom, behind a box of rags no one touched. Inside were papers they never thought to question because they never questioned me. The morning after they measured my room for a yoga studio, I took the folder and walked 3 blocks in the rain to the payphone by the corner store. They'd cut my phone line by accident, but I knew the number by heart. When Mr. Carver answered, I said, "It's time." He didn't ask questions. "Come tomorrow," he replied. Mr. Carver had been my husband's lawyer for years, but they didn't know he'd been mine first. Long before the marriage became a stage and I faded into props, the next day, in his office, I spread out the documents. First, the trust certificate. My name beside my husband's, not as a beneficiary, but as co-founder, co-executive. Then the bank agreement from 15 years ago, showing the deposit from my sold heirlooms, my mother's earrings, my bridal tiara, the amethyst ring from our engagement. I'd liquidated them when the company faced collapse. The money secured the deal that saved his firm. I never asked for recognition. I only asked for him to survive. Last, I presented a stack of handwritten pages, edges yellowed, ink smudged. The original IPO pitch, I said softly. The blueprint for the public offering. Mr. Carver's eyes sharpened. "You wrote this?" I shook my head. "I sent it under a pseudonym." I remembered that night vividly. My husband had been pacing a glass of bourbon untouched on the desk. His board had rejected every pitch. I stayed up after he slept, writing until sunrise, my fingers cramped. I mailed it to the office. No return address. He presented it as his own. The board approved it unanimously. It raised $38 million, and I stayed silent. Mr. Carver pulled a file from his drawer. Revealing a typed letter signed E. Langley, my pseudonym, he compared the signatures. "Still write like this?" he asked. I nodded. He called a handwriting expert from Berkeley that afternoon. They spent hours analyzing strokes, curves, pressure. Days later, the report came, a perfect match. The pitch was mine, legally an invention under patent law, because it was never transferred. The royalty rights millions were mine. Mr. Carver leaned forward. "You know what this means?" I nodded. "I don't want the money," I said. "Not all of it." "Then what do you want?" I folded the papers and stood. My story back. For the first time in years, I let myself smile, a small, fierce smile that started in my chest and reached my eyes. They buried me while I was still breathing. Mistaking silence for weakness, love for surrender. They thought I'd faded like old curtains, but I was watching, remembering. I was the woman who studied contracts by lamplight while her husband slept. Who learned securities law from library books. Who made pies but also choices, brilliant ones. Now, as they divided my home, they didn't know the ground they stood on bore my name, and the paper trail was already filed. I'd let them have their party, their schemes, their laughter. Let them dance in the ashes, thinking I'd vanished. But they forgot me, and that was their final error. They made me sit at the end of the table, on a folding chair, naturally, because my presence clashed with their pressed suits and leather briefcases. The law office was sleek glass walls, chrome accents, cold as frost. Outside, rain fell. Inside, it felt like winter. My son Daniel sat up front, legs crossed, cufflinks gleaming. His wife murmured something, and he laughed just loud enough to carry. "She'll be gone by spring," he whispered, sipping coffee. "No need to budget for her." My granddaughter scrolled on her phone. My grandson doodled his initials on a notepad. None of them looked at me. Mr. Carver entered, briefcase in hand, and the room snapped to attention. He carried an air of finality, a man whose words closed debates. "Thank you for being here," he began. "We're here to execute the last wishes of Mr. Thomas Langley, per his revised will." No one caught the weight of revised. Folders were distributed, pages flipped. Then Mr. Carver produced a small recorder. He pressed play. My husband's voice filled the space, slower, wearier, but clear. "If my son speaks ill of his mother, deduct $1 million per word. You know how many he owes." The room froze. A pen clattered to the table. The voice continued, "She built this with me." Daniel shot up. "This is absurd. That's not real." Mr. Carver raised a hand, sliding forward a transcript labeled Exhibit A, Home Audio. Dining room, for days post-funeral. He read, 1. She's still here. 2. Thought she'd be dead by now. 3. Check her pulse at the reading. 4. She baked pies. He built everything. He listed more 88 statements, totaling $88 million in deductions. Per Clause 17b, Mr. Carver said, the remaining $4.2 million is reduced to $3,900 after discretionary penalties. Daniel's face was ashen. "This is madness." "Dad wouldn't." "He did," I said quietly. Every head turned. My voice was soft but sharp. Mr. Carver continued, "The primary beneficiary of the trust, copyrights, and estate assets is Mrs. Eleanor Langley." He handed me the folder, heavy with deeds, transfers, and patent rights. A smaller envelope held a Paris Flats deed and a letter in my husband's hand. "Forgive me for letting your brilliance hide. I always knew. You built this. Let them see you now." Daniel stood, fists clenched. His wife was already on the phone, likely to a lawyer or a friend. I said nothing. Truth doesn't need volume. I took my coat, the same gray one they'd mocked last winter, and walked past Daniel. "Will that be all?" I asked Mr. Carver. He nodded. "Enjoy Paris." And I did, but not before turning to the family I'd raised, sheltered, and outlasted. "You buried me while I was still thinking," I said. Too bad I had one more thought. The silence after was heavy. But I wasn't done. Mr. Carver opened a second envelope. "This concerns an undisclosed intellectual property matter," he said, presenting documents. 15 years ago, an anonymous proposal, submitted under E. Langley, became the blueprint for Langley Industries IPO. Daniel scoffed. "That was Dad's." Mr. Carver turned a page. "Forensic analysis confirms the author as Mrs. Eleanor Langley." Gasps rippled. "The patent, yielding $9.8 million annually, belongs to her." Daniel's wife gripped her necklace. My granddaughter's phone hit the floor. Daniel muttered, "She baked pies." Mr. Carver smiled faintly. "And saved your father's legacy." He read a notarized note from my husband. "She solved the puzzle before anyone saw it was broken. I took the credit because the board wouldn't follow her. This is her mind's work." Daniel met my eyes. "I didn't know," he whispered. I didn't reply. I'd spent years erasing myself so his father could shine. I'd burned drafts, mailed proposals from another town. But I never forgot. Mr. Carver handed me a ledger of patent royalties, untouched, waiting. "It's yours," he said. My granddaughter spoke, voice small. "We lived off her ideas." No one answered. I stood, buttoning my coat. "I drew the map," I said. "You thought it fell from the sky." I walked out, leaving them staring at their reflections, realizing they'd missed the sharpest mind in the room because it wore a hat. They had 48 hours to leave, per the court-stamped order. By dawn, boxers thudded, laughter gone. Daniel tried, "Mom, please." His voice cracked. I looked at him, this man who once drew me pictures, now begging. "You spoke first," I said. The will listened. His wife shouted, "You're cruel." I stepped forward. "No. I gave you a home. You gave me a cage." I walked through the house, reclaiming it room by room. I peeled stickers off the mirror, the desk, the photo frame. "This one's mine," they'd said. Not anymore. In the dining room, I paused by the piano. A sticker was there too. I closed the lid. "This was always his," I whispered, "and he gave it to me." The house felt clean, exhaling at last. Outside, I knelt by the lavender bush I'd planted when Daniel was born. Its stems were brittle, but roots held firm. I watered it slowly, whispering, "We grow again." The wind stirred, carrying a new quiet. The house wasn't haunted anymore. It was mine. I sold it that spring not out of spite, but because some places hold too many echoes. I moved to a coastal flat in Monterey, with tall windows and the hum of the ocean. The royalties kept coming, but I didn't need them all. So I started a fund, Women Unseen. No fanfare, just grants, scholarships, and recognition for those who built in the shadows and were forgotten in the light. I knew that ache. I knew the weight of whispering genius into someone else's name. And I knew the power of claiming it back. Outside my door, I hung a sign carved from the cedar tree my husband and I planted decades ago. It read, "This home was built by a shadow. Savor the quiet." The delivery man smiled every time. Inside, I kept a few keepsakes, including a crayon drawing on my fridge, made by my youngest grandson before he learned to sneer. It showed me with a giant light bulb. Labeled in green scribbles to Nana. "You think better than the internet." I'd almost tossed it when they said my mind was slipping, that I should sit and fade. But I didn't forget it, or how to think. They thought I was dimming, but I was waiting, watching, remembering what they tried to erase. I was patient, and most importantly, I was still thinking, because I never stopped. They buried me in assumptions, old, frail, irrelevant, but I was none of those. I was the woman who mapped the empire. And when they erased me, I rewrote the story. If you've ever felt unseen, underestimated, or pushed aside, know this: your story isn't done until you say it is. She was more than a mother, more than a wife, more than a shadow. She was the mind that drew the map. And when they tried to erase her, she carved the ending. If this story stirred you, think of how many others wait to be told. Subscribe to Nana's Real Tales for more stories of strength, truth, and women who refuse to fade quietly. Silence may be silver, but truth is gold.